So hello, I'm James Ford, and I'm part of the teachers circle of Empty Moon Zen. We've been exploring the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, and today we've come to taking refuge in the Dharma. Um, in our last presentation, Ed talked a little bit about trinities, and magic numbers are interesting, um, and when we use words like Trinity, we get lots of layering. Now we are really talking about Buddhist trinities here, but there are nonetheless echoes that we might find helpful in the moment when we're talking about Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Um, um, I find myself kind of, especially in the context of taking refuge, in the context of this as precept, um, um, I I'm really taken with a medieval Christian mandala, for the lack of a better word. It's come to be called the Shield of the Trinity, and probably most of us are familiar with it. There's a circle in the middle, and it's labeled God. Then there's a circle for the Father, a circle for the Son, a circle for the Holy Spirit. And then there are these like little tubes connecting them. So God to the Father would be is written in it, and to the Spirit, and to the Son. But then the tubes connecting like Father and Son has is not, you know, is not is, this kind of interesting dynamic. When I think of the refuges in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha, I find that echo kind of intriguing. Now, as it happens in my rummaging around trying to find the source of using the three refuges in Buddhism, I stumble across a kind of a fun little factoid. It happens that in 1880, Colonel Henry Alcott, Henry Steele Alcott, and the famous and notorious Helena Petrovich Blavatsky became the first recorded Europeans, Alcott's an American, uh, to take the three refuges and the five precepts. I'm sure it happened before, but attestation does matter as well. Now, what I was really looking for was, well, when did the taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha become a thing in Buddhism? And I couldn't find the anything attesting to before no and after yes. Um, of enormous antiquity. I suspect it could have dated even to the life of Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, if not certainly shortly after his death. As it happens, the sister religion that often kind of mirrors in extreme sort of ways to Buddhism, the Jain tradition, it actually has a three jewels refuge as well. Theirs is in right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct, as opposed to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Refuge itself is kind of an intriguing, question. You notice it's not so much it's not an I believe, it's I take refuge. Although I believe, again, there's layers of things and echoes in pretty much anything important in our lives. Reb Anderson, one of the teachers at the San Francisco Zen Center, in his exploration of the precepts, being upright, wrote about refuge. The expression "take refuge," he notes, is found in the Pali Saranagama. Sarana referring to a shelter, protection, sanctuary, some place of peace and safety. and gamana refers to the act of returning. Returning was kind of interesting. So he opines that our using our English word refuge feels a really good translation. It actually carries the sense of place. It contains the sense of going back, return, um, and synonymous with shelter and protection. So, uh, where do you go for relief? And returning to our true home, perhaps. So, taking refuge itself is, seen as a surrender in a path that has, we do it ourselves, self power and other power, and how these things kind of, become unclear, mysterious, hazy, evocative. Um, Here we are. Um, so, digging into Dharma as a place of refuge, there's Dharma in the literal sense is the sacred text, the writings, the teachings of Gautama Siddhartha, the canonical material. In a literal sense, this is, the realm of history, the realm of causes and conditions. Taking refuge in that is part of the thing. But also, there's always, again, layering. The Dharma, especially in that shield, in that is and is not. The Dharma is also always about the absolute, the great empty, that pregnant place where nothing and everything and the words collapse, and there is just, from one angle is, and from another angle is not. That Dharma is here as well, and then there's a compassionate aspect, the realm of life, of dream, of possibility, that Dharma, it's all part of this thing that we're engaging and interacting with. Now, returning to Reb just once, he described Dharma as freedom from any difference between ourselves and Buddha. He also said it's also the truth that is realized by a Buddha. And it is, Buddhas recognize Buddhas, patriarchs and ancestors recognize patriarchs and ancestors, matriarchs and ancestors. And it is, quote, the transformation of that truth into scriptures and other forms of teaching. And I like that because there's this kind of two-way street in this. We bring it, what's the foundation of my old preaching life. A sermon could be foolishly preached and wisely heard. Wisdom can be seen in texts that sometimes are useful and might otherwise not be so much so. So just a little digging further into those. First, that, if we're taking refuge in the Dharma, going for that literal understanding of the Dharma and as the study of the texts. Now, our tradition is famously outside of, words and letters, but the grand irony in there is that in East Asian cultures, Zen is probably the most prolific spiritual tradition as far as text is concerned. Great bodies of literature. So, starting with with the Nikayas in Pali and the Agama literature in Sanskrit. The putative sayings and doings of Gautama Siddhartha, that vast body of literature. we're invited to look at that. Now, we rise in the Mahayana, and our emphasis shifts some from what you find in the way of the elders, but um, uh, and therefore it's really worthy to dig into the literature there, to read what it is. Of course, we understand Buddha broadly, and so I love that a medieval polemic, the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Ancestor, is considered a sutra. The sacred, the thread, and the canonical literature for us. Um, we could kind of dig into that if we wanted to, and look at it from all those different angles. I thought a little bit about going into the Heart Sutra, as since we recite it at the drop of a hat. There's a text worth digging into, and if we're taking refuge in the Dharma, well, there's a presentation of the Dharma that is profound and subtle and inviting. For me, when I think of scripture, I think back again to that Christian line. I think it's in the Anglican tradition when they talk about the Bible. They say it contains everything necessary to salvation. And I've always liked that because it doesn't mean it doesn't contain a lot of other things as well. But with some, with with an eye of the heart, mind, then all of a sudden we can begin to find those necessary to salvation elements. And same thing for these sacred texts. I think we would be foolish to take anything as literally it. The invitation in this refuge is to take it not so literally, but definitely seriously. And I talked a little bit about the Platform Sutra. I've talked a little bit about the Heart Sutra. There are such traps along our way if we take something as literal and true and move it outside of the realm of the heart, outside of the realm of our investigation of who it is we are. But taking this vow invites us into something mysterious and potentially fruitful. So it's always important to have that absolute understanding as well. That place where the Dharma allows us to open to the mystery wherever we find it. The teachings of the insentient, the discovery that it's not just written words. It's like the transcendentalist noticing, oh, nature is a sacred text. That's our Dharma as well. Of course, I've seen people fall into the traps along the way. So in the literal thing, you see it all the time. The refrigerator magnet on a relative's kitchen. The Bible says it. I believe it. That settles it. I've seen that with Buddhists as well. We need to be very careful about that. With the absolute, the trap is tumbling into emptiness and getting, I think the technical term is anti-nominalist, where everything is relativized and there isn't anything important. You find it in spiritual communities where people raise the concerns of rubber hitting the road, of human relationships, of slights, insults, and oppressions that are not opening the heart, but rather are crushing and breaking. And occasionally we hear the teachers who say, it's all empty. It's all empty. Yeah, well, fuck them. We got to be careful about that. The absolute is great, but there is nonetheless blood. There is nonetheless suffering and hurt, and there are consequences to what it is we do. It's all happening at once. And so, similarly, that kind of last thing, the compassionate engagement, the bodhisattva way. Well, we can lapse into poetry and just as easily ignore the nitty gritty of our lives. So for me, this whole project, it becomes a koan. Taking refuge in the Dharma is taking refuge in the question, what is this? Um, um, what is this teaching me? Or just what? The deep attention to the the word on paper, to the presentation of the moment, all of that. So I wanted to quickly draw this together with a small example, a case study. For me, I was thinking, again, outside of the box of canonical literature and moving into the things a little closer in our family tradition, the writings of Eihei Dogen, the 13th century Japanese master in our lineage, and his famous Genjo koan, and a line in that, the one we all have heard, I'm sure. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains. And this no trace continues endlessly. Words on paper. Everything necessary to salvation. I love the Genjo koan. I love Eihei Dogen. One can argue the Genjo koan, the koan of everyday life, is the summation of his teachings. One could say it is the summation of our Zen way. It also offers several entry points for the student of the way, each tantalizing, each a full presentation, each a gate. Another way to render the term Genjo koan is actualizing the fundamental point. It's all invitation, embracing the way of the Dharma, bowing to the Dharma, taking refuge in the Dharma, is opening ourselves to invitations. Some specific invitations, I think, little nubs along the way. The most compelling of these nubs, of that fascicle for me, is that line, or those sentences, that paragraph. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. We can take it as a metaphor, and that could be rich. Writing is metaphor. The spiritual way is metaphor. That essay is filled with metaphors. Or we can take it as a koan. It is called the koan of everyday life. We can look at koans, as absolutely, we can take them as metaphors. They're almost always framed as metaphors. A lot of Dharma talks, a lot of essays use koans as metaphors for aspects of our spiritual lives. I've even seen the word koan be defined as a Zen teaching story. Words and texts, the Dharma. Now, I'm not especially fond of the phrase mere metaphor. Metaphors can be powerful teachings and of enormous help for us seeing the world larger than at first it might seem. Text point. But when looking at koans or texts, Dharma texts, as spiritual encounter, I get engaging them at a more metaphorical level can be mere. So if we're taking this vow, what does this actually look like? To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Is it a teaching story? Dharma in that sense? Sure, it can be. And it can be something cutting rather closer to the bone. What is meant when we engage words like self, especially when we hear that the self itself is actualized by the myriad things, by the world itself? What is dropping away? And what is this tracelessness that continues endlessly? Words. Words on ink on paper. The pixels on a screen. Koan is a word for this invitation of taking the vow of refuge in the Dharma. But what I want to invite here is a consideration of another word from the Western tradition, sacrament. How sacrament might inform what we can find within the mystery of our spiritual texts as spiritual practice, the refuge of the Dharma. And more, how we can inform our inner lives, whatever spiritual disciplines we engage. Words like stand, sit, join, see, feel. Good metaphors. Occupy is maybe a bit drier, but also a metaphor. And along the way, there is a necessity, a consideration of who is occupying and who is being occupied. Metaphors. Words on paper, ink on paper, pixels on a screen. And eventually, there's also a collapsing of who and what, along with all the other conceptual arts, when we take refuge in the Dharma. Here we might find ourselves encountering Dogen's invitation. How is it that a text offers everything necessary to salvation? How does a word turn? How does a word turn us? How is it we find refuge in the Dharma? All this, very messy as we allow it to present, becomes a turning toward and into the real. So, sacrament. As a person of the Zen way, I love that we're invited with sacrament onto holy ground, to a holy moment. But we're not, okay, we're not merely seeing something inside of something else, although I think that deeper intimacy is implied in the word sacrament. You need bread and wine for the sacrament of communion. You can argue water and rice. But even then, there is a physical matter involved, and eating as well. Being and doing are not separate. Reading and being are not separate. When that other part of reality, from my perspective, that aspect of the thing that opens into the wild and unnameable, is not joined, but discovered to have always been there, then we're discovering something, a sacrament, a koan, a mystery to be revealed. The whole darn mess found in taking refuge in the Dharma.